I'm with Asha Jadeja Motwani, a venture capitalist based in the US, in California, in the Palo Alto region. She is very well known in circles between India and the US. She runs a family foundation called the Jadeja Motwani Foundation, which does a lot of philanthropic work, and her own work, which involves working with a lot of startups, more than 100 startups. And today we're talking about why campuses in the US are erupting in protests. On Sunday at the UCLA, which is the University of California, Los Angeles, pro-Israel and anti-Israel or pro-Gaza and anti-Gaza protesters, students clashed and the police had to be called in. Hundreds of students all across the US have been arrested for protesting inside college campuses. So, Ms. Motwani, I'd like to start by asking you, what's going on? Is this a freedom of speech issue? Why is the US police arresting these students?
So there are two. So there's a one answer, Jyoti, is that this is a short-term sort of reaction to what's going on in the Middle East. The short-term reaction and the answer to that is that as we see, in this world of social media, as we see live images streaming in, right, of of innocent civilians getting killed, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in Israel, we're seeing all this in front of our, on our phones, right? So we are seeing this level of violence, this level of bloodshed and gore we've not seen before. These days, what you're seeing now is this live sort of, as somebody called it, it's called, scrolling through genocide. Some people were calling it that.
Yeah.
And so what's happening is that there is this general sense that because US is an investor in Israel, because US is so heavily invested in Israel and in Israeli companies and in supporting Israeli military, it is an American outpost actually in the to some extent in the Middle East, and so a lot of people here feel some sort of a moral obligation to say that we should resist, having our companies, especially universities, invested in companies that are helping Israel. So the current,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
The current, what these protests that you're seeing are actually sort of, if you localize it, they're asking for divestment from companies which are invested, which are supporting Israel.
Yeah.
So that's one major thing that they're asking for.
Right.
The second thing they're asking for is for ceasefire. That's what the students are asking for.
Yeah. So, Ashaji, it's interesting that I see myself a change in the tenor of your arguments. I mean, we've been speaking about these issues over the last several months, and since the 7th of October, when Hamas carried out that horrific attack inside Israel, more than 1,200 people were killed, 1,250 Israelis. And then in response to that, the Israeli government, Benjamin Netanyahu, has been targeting Palestinians day and night and day. And we've seen and as you just said, that a lot of people are describing this as a genocide because more than 34,000 Palestinians have been killed. Cities have been obliterated across Gaza and in large parts of Palestine. So this is really horrifying. And from your own, tenor and remarks, I see that that seems to be much more sort of like a searching within America. Is that why is it that America, which is such a strong supporter of Israel, why has it not been able to stop the war? Am I right in my assessment?
So Jyoti, the US is torn on this topic, right? Because on one hand, the Jewish diaspora in the US is so integral to the destiny and the history of this country. It's been here. It's the Jews came here right after the Holocaust. There is such sympathy and love and affection for the Jewish diaspora here. Right? We don't have that much, to be honest, with Palestinians or with Arab immigrants as much as we have with the Jewish people, simply because we've had, the whole episode, the unfortunate episode of 9/11, which I think made the US, especially the middle America, which is much more of the sort of the red states, the Republican states, a lot of them have been very, very reticent of actually even allowing, Muslim immigration, to be honest. Wo bhi chal raha hai. As you saw, Trump had actually announced a ban on immigration from Muslim countries after 9/11. Bush had, and then Trump did, and so there is. So I think the level of support for the Israelis in the U.S. is it's actually so enormous, and it's so massive and rock solid that I don't see that going away. What's happening right now is that the live streaming of what we are seeing as sort of casualties of civilian casualties is something that nobody has the stomach to endure for too long. I think people are saying that, look, something needs to be done, whether it is moving the Gazans from where they are in harm's way to some other place. We as long as we can, as long as there are fewer deaths, nobody has a problem with Hamas getting destroyed. I think in general, I have a feeling that for most moderate and regular Americans, destruction of Hamas, I think, is a worthy goal. That's what people see it as, of every age group. Even people over 30 would say that getting rid of Hamas is an extremely important and a worthy goal. What people don't want to see is this level of civilian casualties, and they're happening. So there is a, and Gaza is full of children, right? It's full
Yeah,
of young
that's right.
kids. So you
Young
have a
kids
lot
being
of people.
being killed. Yeah. The,
Yeah,
the,
so a
the
lot of
massacres that
children.
are taking place is just horrific. So two questions
Yeah,
here, Ashaji. The first is about the protests inside these campuses. I mean, you put a finger on the map of the US, and you talk about any university and it's erupting, right? Whether it's the
right.
Ivy League universities like Harvard, Columbia, Yale, Princeton. In fact, an Indian student at Princeton was also arrested a few days ago.
Yes,
But
that's right.
hundreds and hundreds of young people speaking out against this horrific war, ongoing war in Gaza, in Palestine. Now, the question is, why are they being arrested? I can understand that if they're not allowing other people to speak, because it is a question of your freedom of speech. But why is it that the police is being called into these campuses? And why is it that, students and even faculty, professors are now being, you see pictures of them with their arms being tied behind their backs and being taken
Right.
away. So isn't that a defining image of what's going on in America these days?
Yes, it's an overreaction. It's a crazy overreaction. And I think I think student protests are justified. I actually think that all of us did that in our younger days when Rajiv and I were at Berkeley. We were, constantly protesting against the apartheid in South Africa. So I mean, so I think it's actually healthy for students to be speaking about what they think is right. They're not always right. Many of them are actually, not fully informed, which actually bothers me. But that said, they have a right. This is the First Amendment right of free speech that US has. It has to be protected. Calling the police, I think, is absolutely overreach. It's an overreaction. The reason that this is happening, to some extent, I think, is because there are a lot of outsiders that are pouring into campuses. I've seen this at Stanford. I've seen people who are obviously not students. They're coming from Sacramento or, from places around here, and they're walking into the campus. They are setting up, tents along with the student encampment. And so I think the danger and the fear that some of these universities are having is that if these are outsiders, who are these people, and could they be carrying something? Could they get violent? What if somebody is unwell? Right, what if somebody is unwell in that? Remember, two people just went and burnt themselves alive.
Right.
One was in front of the White House. Both of them were U.S. military people, U.S. Army, sergeants or something, and they were both unwell. They were mentally unwell, and so one of them set himself on fire, I think, in front of the White House. The other one somewhere else. They both died.
Mm.
And so if there is so I think the fear on campus is that what if somebody unstable comes in and
Mm.
has some sort of a homemade device or something that could go off, right? So there is obviously that fear. Second thing is there are final exams going on.
Mm.
Everybody is in the final push to finish their exams, and there's graduation ceremonies for 15th of May. How
Mm.
are people? Those ceremonies require a lot of planning and logistical support because there's thousands of people who are going to be walking. And we know that it's like what we have here is like a World Economic Forum at Stanford. There's just thousands of parents here, grandparents here for graduation. So it's a big production. And if there are people camping out in tents right now, we might not be able to have the graduation ceremony.
So something is
So
stirring.
yeah,
Something is stirring inside America. And a few months ago, when I talked to you and we talked about the vice chancellors of some of these universities who had been
yeah,
called in at the Senate and had been questioned, and a lot of them were asked to resign for one reason or the other. They may not
right.
have directly linked it to the war in Gaza. And at the time, I sensed that you were much more in support of this of the need for these. Women vice chancellors. All three of them were women at the time. But today I sense that you are much more in support of the students. So something is happening in America. If people like you are also responding to this, to these protests and to
Yes.
so
So
what is it? I want to ask you again. What is
yes.
it?
So I think here's what's going on. That I think on October 7, all of us were hands down in support of Israel going in and
Mhm.
really clearing out Hamas, right? We were really all hands down. I think what none of us expected was the level of collateral damage, as they call it, that would happen. And the number of civilians that are going to get killed, it's the women and children. And we're seeing pictures. They're being live streamed to our devices all the time. And we have to see them. Actually, it's not that we can turn away also. I think it's our moral, I think it's a moral duty to know what's going on before we react. So there is no doubt about that. But I think what was the question you were asking,
My
Jyoti?
question is that something is happening inside America, even if people like you, who are more circumspect, who think things through before they react and respond. I mean, you are yourself coming out in support of the students' right to protest in
Yeah,
terms of free speech. But there's more that's happening inside America. This is an election year. Do you think that this will impact Joe Biden's presidency? Is this perhaps going to be Joe Biden's
definitely.
Vietnam? Do you think that?
It's not his Vietnam. It's not that big yet because we don't have any troops, right?
Yeah.
In either
And
in Ukraine or in
but you
Israel.
do have American soldiers, a few and far between, maybe just a handful, but you are supporting the Israeli military. I mean, if it wasn't for the
Absolutely.
US, uh, the Israelis would not have carried out this level of destruction that they have been able to in Gaza.
It is full support of the US. This war is in full today. If President Biden wanted to stop the war, he could do it in 3 hours, less than 3 hours. He could stop the war. It's not going to happen because the support for US, the support for this war on the US side is heavy because precisely because the US genuinely believes that terrorism cannot be allowed to, it cannot be a way of dialogue. There is no proxy for dialogue and concessions and compromise, and terrorism is not it. And I know that the US in the not only in Washington but also just across the board in US, I think there is just such there is such a visceral reaction against anything that seems even a little bit like 9/11. you
Mhm.
know and I think it's a trauma of a nation that it's just coming back. It's literally this 10/7 has 10th October has become, you know, sorry, October 7th has
Yeah.
become for us really a reliving of 9/11. And I can see it because people are constantly talking about it. We're talking about intolerance of groups like Hamas and so on. So there's definitely that happening. I think, and remember that this is a flow. It's like a stream. It's a fast flowing stream. What we were thinking just last week
Yeah.
will probably be altered by what happens next week, right? What happens in Rafah, for example, is going to determine how we all feel towards the slowdown in this war, towards a ceasefire, what we feel about it. As far as your question about Biden goes, he is I think he's been impacted. His popularity has been impacted precisely because he did not take decisive action
Mhm.
about any of these things. Basically, they were, wishy-washy about it in the beginning, didn't know how to react. And I think they said we are fully behind Israel. They said so. But I think when it came to, providing aid to the Gazans or thinking about sort of, negotiating about the hostages, I think the US was not very clear in its mandate.
Mhm.
And so it is going to affect. But the problem here is that if and personally, if you ask me, I think Trump is going to come back. But if if Biden is, if the left, which I'm not, I'm center right, but if the left comes in and and actually sabotages Biden from from winning, as they are doing right now, I think they're bringing in Trump, and this is going to be the worst thing that can happen for America in economics, in our global aspirations, in American leadership globally if we get Trump.
Because Trump has said on Twitter just a day or so ago, stop these protests in these US campuses. So he's taking a hardline position on the protests. I don't think he's thinking about your First Amendment, where you have a right to freedom of speech. But
Yes,
he's accusing Biden of being wishy-washy, of saying a cha on the one hand and on the other.
right.
So he's coming out much more in support of what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing. So, what is this doing to the politics in the US between the center right and the far right?
Right. So I think the center right doesn't want Trump also because I think everybody's afraid that he will, he'll it'll be really bad for the economy
Mm-hmm.
and for our own global sort of free trade and stuff like that, because he's really coming down heavy against free trade.
Mm-hmm.
And but Trump would be hands down an unequivocal supporter of Israel. If Trump comes back, I think we are going to see, uh, I think we are going to see pressure for regime change, what we call regime change here, which is just sort of like how do we get rid of the Ayatollah, or how do we get rid of Xi Jinping? So two entities that I think the US will be thinking about in terms of regime change. One is Iran, and the second is China. And I think that's dangerous, actually, because it's, with Iran, yes, maybe we can do a little bit of, intelligence fiddling and so on, and maybe bring about some kind of, instability in Iran. But trying to do that in China would be disturbing a hornet's nest. And I don't think we should be doing that. So I'm afraid if Trump comes on board, a lot of things are going to be much more authoritarian.
Mm-hmm.
If he comes on board, I think it'll be much more heavy-handed. I don't think he's going to be sitting there and negotiating with students. I mean, the campuses will be closed for students to study, and that's it. No protesting and stuff like that, because actually, to be honest, what I'm looking at here at Columbia University, most other universities, Stanford and all, is reasonable. I go to Stanford all the time. It's reasonable. I don't see any major drama going on at Columbia and UCLA. I think the problem is they're not allowing Jewish students to
Mm-hmm.
go into public spaces like libraries and the encampment area and stuff like that. They can't even walk through that.
Mm-hmm.
There are slurs being slung around. There are people, if they wear the Star of David, or they wear the kippah or something, there are comments on that. I think it's a very unhealthy thing. I've never seen this happening before. Um, Even though I think majority of the students are protesting peacefully, there are some bad apples in there, and they may not even be students. They may be just sort of outsiders hanging around the campus.
Right. So, obviously, I'm not going to call this a fracture in society or in the students'
Mm.
community, but there are these cleavages that are now coming to the surface. And I'm just wondering, you talked very eloquently about what's happening inside the Democratic Party, but do the Democrats understand that this, lackadaisical approach that Joe Biden has adopted, this sort of, like I said, wishy-washy on the one hand, and on the one hand, he doesn't want to shut down the students' protests because of the whole Democratic sort of parties, their whole ideology is in favor of rights and fundamental speech
Mhm.
issues. But on the other hand, they also understand that what Netanyahu is doing is wrong. But it seems as if Biden doesn't have the power to control Netanyahu. So tell me, inside the Democratic Party, what are people saying? Should Biden be replaced even at this late stage? Should there be another candidate? Should Netanyahu be told to climb down and perhaps find a way? Although we keep hearing about ceasefire and humanitarian pauses, but nothing seems to be working.
No, it won't, Jyoti. There is unfettered support for Israel in Washington D.C. These campus protests mean nothing. They have no, except for, affecting public opinion. Yes, it looks bad in the global press. It looks bad as a, on sort of headlines of New York Times saying, oh, Columbia, professor goes to jail, or the Columbia president goes to the US Congress and testifies and so on. So yes, it's bad for the optics, but it doesn't make a dent in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is 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 unequivocally behind Israel on its military ambitions. So that, I think, is not something that's going to change, whether it's Republicans or Democrats. Now, if you're asking me why that is so, well, I think the Israeli lobby here in the US is very powerful. And I think, like any other lobby, like a Russian lobby or Indian lobby, or, people, basically it's an interest group, right? Public interest group. So it could be anybody. It could be gays, and could be lesbians, could be women's rights groups. We are all fighting for influence in Washington, D.C. There is no doubt about it. And that's what the Israelis are doing. They're, doing that is perfectly legit. But they're powerful, they're organized. You should see the way the Indians are, Jyoti. We are completely disorganized. We have, all this, success and wealth and all that, fine. But when it comes to kind of exercising our political muscle in Washington, D.C., we don't do anything. We are disorganized. We go once in a while, somebody will go, some Bengali association will go, or some, Tamil so-and-so will go meet somebody, take photos, come back. But we are not really bringing about serious policy changes that we could and we should. And I'm hoping that I'm one of the first few to stick my neck out and say, let's do something in Washington, D.C., तो अभी
Correct.
धीरे धीरे कर रहे हैं, थोड़ा थोड़ा कर रहे हैं हम लोग.
So a couple of related questions, Asha ji. Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, was in China recently, and he met Xi Jinping. Lots of pictures on that. Now, the Chinese haven't said very much at all. They've been very, very quiet on the Israel-Palestine war. A, why do you think so? I mean, it's a no-brainer, but still, I really want to hear why you think so. And what kind of impact could this have? I mean, right now we're not talking about US-China relations, but of course everything is mixed up, right? So I'd like to hear what you say, what you think.
The Russians, the Chinese right now are very, very kind of openly funding the Russian military exercises right now. There's a lot of Chinese support going into Russia. And we all know that. We all talk about it. The articles are there in The Economist and stuff like that. So China is definitely taking a stand as far as Russia goes. That alliance is forming. There is we in the US, we call it the axis of evil, which is Russia, China, and Iran. And that they are coming together willy-nilly because of all these wars that are going on. There's all these global, disruptions in the supply chains of oil and of gas and fertilizers and food. So everybody is somewhat, sort of wary of what this axis of evil would look like, and what if they really synced up on various fronts? What would it look like? How could it threaten the US?
Yeah.
So there is no doubt in my mind that China is focused right now on Russia-Ukraine war. I don't think they want to stick their neck out. There is still way too much, back and forth. Trade relations are still very deep with the US. Blinken was there, and I think Blinken did try to suggest to the Chinese that, weaponry should not be going into Russia because that directly hurts the Europeans. And the biggest customers of Chinese goods are the Europeans. So this whole Blinken conversation was around the whole trade between Europe and China, and to ask them to hold back on military support. As far as Israel Gaza goes, that Jyoti, is, to be honest, it's not. Yes, it looks awful on the, and I mean, in geopolitics, it's an awful war, and it's an ugly war from a human perspective. But from a geopolitical perspective, policy level, no dent in Washington, D.C. There is no dent of any of these public opinion, polls, and what do the Jordanians think? Nobody cares. What do the Chinese think? Nobody cares. The right now the I think the sentiment within the U.S. is that we just hope that no escalation happens between Israel and Iran, because that could be a much worse situation. I think everybody is steeling themselves to see if Hamas will take the offer. US has given an offer today, right? I think, or yesterday, the Israeli offer for swapping of hostages for, I think, for a 2-month ceasefire with an unlimited, I think it's called the calm. I think it's called the sort of the permanent calm. But the demand on Hamas is that there would be no rockets being fired into Israel. And it would actually, apparently it's a pretty generous offer that Israel has made, whereby they are actually looking, they're saying if we get all the 130 or so hostages, whoever is alive,
Yeah.
I think we are looking at a good 7,000 to 8,000 Palestinian prisoners going home.
Yeah.
So there's a big, I just hope and pray for the sake of Gazans in Rafah that that Hamas accepts this.
So let me just, come back and attempt to close the circle by asking you, now there are thousands of Indian students in the US, right? Hundreds of thousands. In fact, I think the US Indian community, or the Indian community in the US, student community, is perhaps the largest expatriate student community in the world. Now, what does this do to, to the relationship? I mean, I know that maybe it's a bit of a stretch because the students are doing what they're doing. And like you said, governments are very cynical about the policies that they will adopt, whether it's in Delhi or in DC. But I'm just wondering if Indian students are participating in these protests, like students from elsewhere in the world,
Yeah.
some are being arrested. Will this have an impact, or are the Americans, again, a bit of a stretch? What do they think about what's happening inside India? We are in the middle of a general election. Freedom of speech issues do come up vis-a-vis India under the Modi government. So maybe I'm conflating too many things at the same time, but I'm asking you to put on your policy wonks hat and tell us about what are your thoughts?
So I think there are two kinds of Indian students, right? One is Indian students who come from India.
Yeah. Okay.
Overall, they stay above the fray. They stay above this whole drama. I mean, the Indian students who have come from India, a lot of them, I would say a bulk of them actually are in STEM fields. So they are in engineering, sciences, physics, math. Remember, most of the protesters that we have are from the humanities.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting divide right there, disciplinary divide between social sciences, humanities, English, gender studies, gay studies, Middle Eastern studies. Those are the people who are in the protest groups and in the encampments. The people who are in physics, math, engineering, computer science are staying out of this loop. So Indians are mostly out of this loop. I think in Princeton, 2 or 3 of them got into trouble, but I don't think any of them was expelled. Maybe one was expelled, right? I
Yeah.
think. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But in general, then the second divide that's there is Indian students coming from India versus Indian American students. The Indian American students are much more engaged in this protest because I think they have so much invested and they understand, right, that their parents' tax dollars are going into the Middle East. So they are looking and they're trying to understand. And the Indian American students are much more engaged on both sides, on the Israeli side and on the Hamas side, on the Palestinian side. They're quite involved actually.
So are there any conversations now, coming back to India and talking about freedom of speech issues inside the country? And like I said, we are in the middle of a general election, and a lot of this is, we discuss everything here and the front pages of our newspapers, like you do in the US. But
Right.
is that connection being made, or right now that's too far for anyone to think about?
No, I think I think as far as the US, as far as we all go here, I think in general the people are fascinated. I mean, first of all, people recognize. I think most people in the world, I think, are beginning to recognize that Modi is coming back.
Yes.
That he's widely popular. He's coming back. So I think the surprise factor there is kind of gone down to low, and nobody's sitting there and saying, oh, who else could be coming? And people just feel so I think so first of all, there's a positive feeling about elections happening here. One is the fascination for the fact that how can any country pull off 1 billion people, and in electronically, digitally, and in every sort of security perspective, how can a nation pull this off? People are sitting here blown away by India, Jyoti. People are blown away. I mean, whoever I talk to, people are like, how is this even possible? 1 billion people, sometimes in levels of poverty, right? In coming from in very poor pockets, and yet they are there in lines, in the blaring heat of Indian summer,
That's
and
because
they
we're
are
invested in our democracy. We want it to
we
succeed,
are.
right?
We are. And so it is a proud moment for us from foreign perspective, as far as we outsiders go. People are sitting there and saying, look at this. I mean, this is, so I think so there is, first of all, that fascination. I think the second thing is, from the Wall Street types, there is absolute joy that if India stabilizes for the next 5 years, Modi comes back, India is stable, economy continues growing the way it is growing right now, we are in good shape. Because that way, the Wall Street or the investors from US would like to pour in and settle into India, right? So whether it's Tesla, whether it's Wall Street investors, private equity investors, hedge fund guys, people are always looking for a market in an emerging, in the emerging sort of developing world, where they can put in their capital. So India is a hugely important destination. We all know that Micron and all these companies are setting up semiconductors. We have supply chains coming up, and there is absolutely no doubt that the US is shifting out of China. Where is all this stuff going to go? And India is absolutely the most natural choice, because it's a free country, it's a democracy, and there's a rule of law, and now, because of the diaspora here, which is in every walk of life, we are here right now. The trust factor for the Indian diaspora is so huge that people are not looking at, there is a little bit tarnishing, Jyoti, to come back to your question about, are people asking questions about, are there clampdowns on free? Yeah, I think there is murmur going on. I think there is general sense once in a while from New York Times, or some article will come out and say, oh, Modi is authoritarian, and there are maybe some journalists some journalists who have not been able to speak well. Maybe media is getting suppressed by the ruling party. So there is a little bit of that tarnishing that has happened, but not a whole lot. I think when you look at it in balance of what India promises as a nation, right? As
Right.
what does it promise? It brings so much to the table that people are just, and even defense. Even on defense, people are saying that, heavens forbid, if something went wrong in the Middle East, Asia, that side, or Taiwan, there
Right.
is, India is being seen as the most important partner in the Indo-Pacific.
Yeah.
So I think that overall, I think the sense about India right now is nothing but bullish. Every day, I'm noticing every day on
Mhm.
US campuses, there's a US India conference every day.
Mm.
And sometimes there are two, sometimes there are three. And it's like people are coming from India, people are going from here to India. There is just so much back and forth. And I think it's a healthy thing. I think it's very good, because it's two large democracies that are coming together in ways that we've never done before.
Yeah, two large democracies, chaotic democracies coming together, speaking to each other,
Very chaotic, very
sharing
messy.
their thoughts. Absolutely. And we'll have to leave it there. But Ashaji, I really wanted to thank you for explaining the US story to us. And because as we watch the student protests day after day after day, and the ongoing massacre in Gaza, and to make sense of all this, and the cynicism in Washington as well as in Delhi, we are in the middle of an election. That's not cynical, let me assure you. So I'd like to thank you very much. Asha Jadeja Motwani, thank you so much for speaking to ThePrint on all these issues, especially on the campus protests in America, which we will be watching very closely every day. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.